I've done a lot of solo camping over the years. Some people think it's dangerous, but I've always believed that being alone in the woods isn't any more dangerous than living in the city. I'm careful. I don't take stupid risks. I plan everything, check the weather, bring more than I need, and leave a copy of my itinerary with someone I trust. I've had close calls with bad weather, twisted ankles, and even a bear once, but nothing that ever shook me enough to stop going. This trip was supposed to be just another quiet few days in the bush. I picked a remote patch of forest in southern Africa, not a national park or any well-trafficked zone, but a private conservancy that allowed overlanders and bush campers with the right permits. I'd been to South Africa before, but this time I wanted something even more remote. I arranged access through a local outfitter who provided GPS coordinates for designated bush campsites, which were essentially clearings with no amenities, no fences, no human contact, just wilderness. I flew into Johannesburg, rented a 4x4 with a rooftop tent, loaded it up with water, fuel, and supplies, and started heading north. After 2 days of driving with one overnight stop, I reached the boundary of the conservancy. There was a locked gate and a dirt track leading inward. I unlocked it with the code I was given and drove through, closing the gate behind me. That was the last sign of civilization I'd see for the next several days. The drive-in was long and slow. The dirt track was rutted and overgrown in places. I passed no one. There were thorn bushes on either side, small dry trees, and the occasional sound of something moving in the underbrush. It was dry season, so the grass was brittle and yellow. I stopped a few times to scan with my binoculars, hoping to see some wildlife. I caught glimpses of impala, some giraffes in the distance, and a large bird that looked like a martial eagle. Nothing too exciting, but I hadn't expected anything on the drive-in. The good sightings usually came at dawn or dusk. By the time I reached the designated campsite, the sun was already low. It was a clearing about 20 meters across, ringed by thorn bushes and scrub trees, with a worn patch in the middle just big enough to park the vehicle and pop the tent. I turned off the engine, sat for a minute listening, and heard only cicadas and the wind rustling dry branches. I got out, stretched, and started setting up camp. I unfolded the rooftop tent, got my sleeping bag inside, set up a small cooking table near the back of the truck, and heated up a can of chili. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped fast. That part of Africa, especially in the dry season, can get cold at night. By the time I finished eating, I was already zipping up my fleece. I didn't make a fire. Fires can attract attention from animals and sometimes from people. I preferred to stay low profile when I was alone in a place like this. After dinner, I cleaned up, packed all my trash and food back into the vehicle, and climbed up into the tent. I zipped the canvas tight and left only the small mesh windows open on either side for air. I kept my flashlight, knife, and GPS beacon close by. Standard routine. The night sounds came quickly. Insects, chirps, the distant whoop of a hyena somewhere far off. I'd heard all of it before, and it didn't bother me. The bush has a rhythm to it. You learn what's normal. It's usually not quiet unless something big is around. That's when you should worry. I drifted off sometime after 9 p.m. The cold made me curl up tight inside the sleeping bag. I slept lightly like I usually do on the first night. Every little rustle would tug me toward wakefulness, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A few times I heard something moving in the bush nearby, but nothing close enough to worry me. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up because of the cold. The tent didn't hold heat well, and my sleeping bag was rated for mild temperatures, not real cold. I lay there shivering, debating whether to get up and pull on another layer. But then I felt warmth against my back. Slow, heavy warmth, like when my cat back home would crawl up behind me on the couch and press herself against my spine. I smiled in the dark. It felt oddly comforting, even though I knew it wasn't possible. Just a memory, maybe. I must have tucked a blanket weird or curled into my own body in a way that felt like a warm shape. Still, I was too tired to analyze it. I let the warmth lull me back to sleep. I woke up again just before dawn. The air was sharp and dry. Pale light filtered through the mesh window. I rolled over and stretched, rubbing my arms to get the blood flowing. That's when I remembered the warmth from earlier and realized how strange it was. There was no one else in that tent. No source of heat. It had been near freezing. I sat up and unzipped the tent flap to look around. The bush was quiet, still gray-blue in the early light. Nothing looked out of place. I climbed down the ladder and walked a slow circle around the truck. There were prints in the dirt. Not human, not boot prints, large paw prints. I crouched to look more closely. The tracks circled the vehicle. Some came very close to the ladder. Others meandered out toward the edge of the clearing. I followed them a few feet before they disappeared into harder ground. They were feline, definitely a big cat. The size and spacing suggested something large, heavy. Not a leopard, bigger. I felt my stomach twist. The warmth, the shape, the weight I thought I'd imagined behind my back. It wasn't a memory. Something had climbed into my tent, or at least onto the tent platform during the night. I looked at the fabric near the rear. There were two faint impressions on the canvas, low near the edge, like paws pressing down from outside. I hadn't locked the ladder. It would have been easy for something strong to climb up. I didn't panic, but I moved carefully. I checked my gear, looked for claw marks, sniffed the air. No blood, no scent of urine, nothing obviously disturbed. Just those tracks, and that memory of warmth against my back. I packed quickly and decided to move to another site, farther north. The next 2 days were quiet. I changed location twice, each time several kilometers deeper into the conservancy. I kept the same routines, but now I made sure to pull the ladder up at night. I kept my bear spray within reach, though I wasn't sure it would help against a lion, because that's what I was starting to believe it had been, a lion. A female, maybe, since they tend to roam more. A young one, curious. I saw fresh tracks near the second site, but none near the third. I told myself it was probably miles away by then. It had investigated me, found nothing interesting, and moved on. Wild animals don't usually stick around people unless they associate us with food or danger, but the final night was different. I was camped on a rise overlooking a dry riverbed. The clearing was more open here, ringed with taller trees. I liked the visibility. I could see far in every direction. After dinner, I watched the stars come out. It was the kind of sky you only see far from towns, full of sharp white light, quiet enough to hear your own breath. I felt safer here, though that feeling didn't last. Just after I got into the tent, I heard something. Not close, not threatening, just distant movement. Something big walking through the brush. I listened for a while, but it didn't come nearer. I lay down, zipped myself in, and closed my eyes. I don't know what time it was when I woke again. Maybe just after midnight. The tent was darker than before. No moon. My breath puffed out in little clouds. I shifted slightly and froze. There it was again. That warmth. Heavy, steady, pressed against my back through the fabric of the sleeping bag. I was on my side, facing the canvas wall of the tent, with something large curled behind me. No sound, no breathing, just warmth and a faint, slow pressure, like it was lying beside me, not moving, not aggressive. I stayed completely still. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. My mind raced with images, claws, teeth, the weight of a body pinning me down. But none of that came. Whatever it was didn't make a sound. It didn't shift or paw at me. It didn't huff or growl. It just stayed there. Eventually, I must have drifted into a half-sleep again. Not real sleep, just that gray limbo where your mind floats and your body feels distant. When I woke again, the sun was rising. The warmth was gone. I sat up slowly and unzipped the tent. Dew clung to everything. I climbed down and immediately looked for tracks. This time they were everywhere. Deep, fresh, circling the vehicle again. A lioness for sure. And not alone. There were 2 sets now. One smaller, maybe a subadult. One big. The big one had stepped up onto the ladder platform again. Same faint indentations in the fabric. No damage. No claw marks. But definitely there. I left that morning, packed up and drove straight out of the conservancy. It took nearly a full day to get back to the main road and another to reach the city. I didn't tell the outfitter much. Just said I'd seen lion sign and decided not. I've spent a lot of nights under canvas in all kinds of places and in all kinds of weather. It's part of the job when you work as a safari guide in the Lowveld. That sort of life toughens you up, gets you used to the dark and the sounds and the rhythms of the bush. You grow into the quiet of it, and your senses shift to catch things earlier than they used to. Subtle movements, changes in wind, rustles that aren't just wind or leaves. But even after years of doing it, there are still nights that surprise you. It was the middle of winter and the air was sharp and dry. Nights in the Lowveld during that time of year dip close to freezing. We were camped out in a fairly open area. Flat terrain with low grass and a few acacia trees scattered around. The camp was basic. No fences, just a couple of tents, a fire pit, and our vehicle parked a few meters away. I had been out with a group during the day, a drive along one of the riverbeds, and we'd return to camp just before dark. The plan was simple: make a small fire, cook some food, and turn in early. My buddy and fellow guide had his own tent pitched about 10 meters away from mine. That night, we didn't stay up long. It was too cold to sit around outside once the fire died down. I remember bundling up in my sleeping bag, pulling the drawstring tight around my head to keep the warmth in. The canvas of the tent was thin, just one layer between you and everything else outside. I remember hearing the usual sounds, nightjars calling out, a few distant whoops from hyenas. Somewhere off in the distance, a baboon barked, maybe disturbed by something. I must have fallen asleep quickly. The day had been long, and the cold tends to make you sleep deeper. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The first thing I noticed was the warmth. My back felt warm. Not just warm, but almost cozy. It was a strange thing to wake up to in that kind of cold. It took a few seconds for my mind to catch up, for me to register that I hadn't turned in my sleep. I was still lying on my side, my back right up against the tent wall. The warmth wasn't from me. It was coming from outside. I didn't move, not even a little. I stayed there, eyes wide open in the dark, trying to breathe as quietly as I could. My heart started to thud hard in my chest. The warmth was soft too, heavy. It pressed against the canvas in a slow, breathing way. I could feel each rise and fall of it. That's when the awareness hit me. That was an animal, something alive, something large, and it was lying against my tent, against me. I kept still. My mind ran through the options. Leopard? Unlikely. Not heavy enough. Hyena? Maybe. But hyenas don't usually just curl up and lie still like that. Then the possibility hit me like a punch in the gut. Lion. And the size matched. The weight, the heat, everything about it made sense. Then, from the dark, I heard a voice. Not from outside, but not from inside my tent either. It was my buddy, from his own tent nearby. His voice was quiet, low, but shaky in a way I'd never heard before. "The Africa bug? Are you awake?" I stayed quiet for a beat. Maybe I should have whispered. Maybe I should have kept still. But instead, like a fool, I answered with full voice, loud and clear. Yes, the animal moved. It didn't growl. It didn't roar. It didn't make a sound. Not one I could hear over the pounding in my ears. But I felt it shift. The warmth pressed away. The weight disappeared. I heard the soft thuds of padded feet and the faint rustle of disturbed grass. Then silence. I didn't sleep again that night. Not a minute. I lay there staring at the curve of the canvas above me, listening to every sound, every scrape, every gust of wind. My breathing never slowed down. I waited for the light, waited for the sun to rise so I could unzip that tent and crawl out and see where it had been. When dawn finally came, I stepped out slowly. The ground was crisp with frost. My boots crunched against the hard grass. I turned to look at the side of the tent where I'd felt the pressure, and sure enough, the imprint was there. Flattened grass, a spot cleared of dew. A circle of warmth had melted the frost away where it had laid. I followed the tracks, large paw prints, heavy and wide. They moved away from the tent in a slow, straight line. Calm, not hurried. We followed the tracks together for a bit. They led toward a dry riverbed not far off. Eventually, they vanished into thicker brush. It had been a large male, traveling alone, likely just using the warmth of the tent wall to fight off the cold. I wasn't food. I wasn't a threat, just a temporary source of heat. Still, that moment shifted something in me. I've spent my whole adult life out there, thinking I knew the rules, understood the patterns. But that moment taught me that no matter how prepared or experienced you think you are, the wild doesn't care. It follows its own rhythm, and it's only by sheer chance that things hadn't ended differently. If that lion had been hungry, if it had been startled, if I had rolled over in my sleep, a dozen different things could have gone wrong. After that trip, we made small changes. We never camped without something between us and the canvas, not even a layer of gear. We also kept the fire going longer and slept lighter. It was a reminder we needed that even out there where we felt most at home, we were still guests. I tell that story now to new trainees, not to scare them, but to remind them. The bush isn't a zoo. It doesn't follow your expectations. You respect it, you learn its ways, and sometimes you get lucky enough to keep learning instead of becoming a story someone else tells. Looking back, I don't think that lion wanted anything from me. It was just cold, just looking for warmth, and I happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. Or maybe it was the wrong place at the right time. I'm not sure, but I know this: the wild doesn't owe you safety. Every peaceful night out there is a borrowed one. And that one night, I came way too close to running out of luck. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, camping in every kind of condition. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it's boring, but sometimes it gets under your skin in a way that sticks with you, even years later. There are 3 times that come to mind when I think about the scariest camping experiences I've ever had. All of them were different kinds of fear, not the make-believe horror movie stuff. The real kind, the kind that makes you doubt your surroundings, your decisions, and sometimes your own safety. The first time was with my wife. We had decided on a short weekend trip into a forest filled with jack pine. Thin, rough trees that grow tall but don't have much strength to them. The spot was a familiar one. We'd been there before and we knew the trail in and out. It wasn't far from the main road, maybe a 20-minute walk through the woods from where we parked the truck. We set up camp quickly, 2-person tent, a little fire pit, and our gear stashed in the bear bag. That night, a windstorm rolled in. I'm not talking about a little gust now and then. I'm talking full-force winds whipping through the trees hard enough that the trunks were creaking and groaning. At first, it just sounded like wind rushing through the needles. But soon, branches were cracking, falling nearby with loud snaps. You could hear the trees straining. One of them let out a deep groan and then came crashing down maybe 20 feet from the tent. I could feel the ground shudder. We just laid there in the dark, listening, not saying a word. There wasn't anything to say. I knew how brittle jack pines were. We shouldn't have camped there, not in that kind of forest. For hours, the wind didn't let up. Branches kept falling, and once I heard a loud crash that sounded like another tree going down. My wife was curled up against me, but I could tell she was wide awake. I kept thinking that if one tree came down the wrong way, it could land on us and that would be it. There's no warning, no time to run. You can't move fast enough in a sleeping bag. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Just laid there, waiting for the wind to calm. It finally did sometime near morning. We packed up and left without breakfast. The second time, I was camping with my best friend. This one was strange. It wasn't fear of getting hurt. It was the kind of fear that creeps in when something doesn't make sense. We drove up to this semi-remote camping area, technically a drive-in spot, but only if you had a 4x4. The place was forgotten by most. You could tell. There were fire pits, sure, but the picnic tables were half-rotten and the outhouse looked like it hadn't been cleaned or used in years. Parks probably checked it once a year, if that. We got there and started setting up our gear. He walked off to check out the outhouse, 2 doors side by side. I kept working on the tent. After a few minutes, he came back and told me to go check out the first outhouse stall. I figured he meant something gross, like a raccoon had died in there or someone had made a mess. I didn't expect what I saw. I opened the door, and sitting on the floor were 3 full-size backpacks. These weren't day packs either. They were big, multi-day hiking packs. like the kind you use for a week-long trip. That alone was strange. Why would someone leave 3 loaded packs in an outhouse? I looked inside. The first 2 were full of high-quality gear, stove, sleeping bags, some food, clothes. Nothing obviously weird, but the third one was different. It was full of Skittles. I'm not exaggerating. I mean full. Bulk bags, snack-size bags, tropical flavors, sour, original. Every kind of Skittle I've ever seen. Dozens of bags, maybe 100. There was nothing else in that pack. Just candy. No ID, no wallet, nothing. We stayed for 4 days. Never saw a single person. Not one. Not a car, not a hiker. The bags never moved. We checked again before we left, just to be sure. Still there. We told a conservation officer about it when we got back to town. They just said they'd send someone to check it out. I still think about those bags. Who brings that many Skittles into the woods? Why? And why leave 3 good packs like that in an outhouse? I'll never know. It wasn't threatening, not exactly, but it was unsettling in a way I can't explain. The third time was different. This was real danger. I was camping solo with my dog. It was a last-minute trip. I threw a tarp and some basic gear into the back of the car and drove out. Didn't go far. Just wanted to get away for the night. I parked along an old logging road and hiked maybe a mile in. Found a nice flat spot and rigged up a simple tarp shelter. Nothing fancy. Small fire, just enough to keep bugs away. My dog settled in quick, just curled up near the fire. I was dozing off when I heard it. An engine. Not close, but loud. Sounded like a truck tearing through the woods. Then I heard voices, loud, drunk voices. And then gunshots. At first, I thought maybe it was someone hunting, but it was late and they were obviously wasted. I sat up fast, heart pounding. The shots kept going. I couldn't see them, but based on where the road ran, I was pretty sure they were firing in my direction, even if they didn't know I was there. Maybe target shooting, maybe just screwing around. Either way, I didn't want to be anywhere near it. I put the fire out quick, grabbed my dog, and got moving. I didn't pack, didn't have time. Just shoved the important stuff into my bag and headed back the way I came, keeping low and quiet. I could still hear them laughing and yelling, and more shots. My dog was close, right on my heel. I didn't even turn my headlamp on. I knew the way by feel. When I got back to the car, I tossed my stuff in and left fast. Didn't stop. Drove all the way home without saying a word to myself. That night scared me more than anything else because it was real. Guns, drunk people, bad decisions. Not a ghost story. Not something that fades with time. It was just luck that I didn't get shot. Camping is one of my favorite things. It's peaceful. It's quiet. It clears your head. But you never really know what's going to happen when you're out there. Could be a storm. Could be someone else's strange behavior. Could be real danger. You don't control anything but your own choices. And sometimes that's not enough. Those 3 trips stick with me. I still go out. I still camp. But I'm more careful now. I pick different spots. I listen harder. And I never forget that the scariest things in the woods aren't stories. They're the things you don't expect. The wind, the silence, or the sound of laughter when you're supposed to be alone. I was never much of a camper growing up, but as I got older, something about getting away from everything started to appeal to me more and more. The city noise, the constant notifications, even just the buzz of people always doing something, they all got louder in my head the longer I stayed in it. So I started taking trips on my own. Nothing too crazy at first. Just a night or 2 in areas that were easy to reach, not far off the beaten path. But with time, I started pushing a little farther, spending longer stretches out in places most people didn't think about much. Arizona became a favorite. There's something different about the desert out there. I don't know if it's the stillness or the way the heat just makes everything feel slowed down. But once you've walked a trail in the early morning with nothing around you but saguaros and the sound of your own boots scraping the dirt, it kind of sticks with you. It was early spring when I decided to head out again. I picked Sabino Canyon right on the edge of Tucson. It wasn't a backcountry survival kind of place, but it was rugged enough to give me that feeling of being out there. It had the right balance. Solid trails, good views, not too isolated, but also not crawling with people depending on the time of day. I packed light since I was only planning on camping one night. I brought a small one-person tent, a lightweight sleeping bag, enough food and water to last 2 days if I ration well, and a basic first aid kit. I kept my phone on airplane mode to save battery, but I had a portable charger packed away just in case. I started out early in the morning so I could get a good spot and have time to hike before it got too hot. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, maybe 75 degrees, with a breeze just strong enough to keep you from sweating too much on the climbs. The trail into the canyon was beautiful. Rocky in parts, winding in others, always shifting between sun and shade depending on the height of the cliffs beside it. The deeper I went, the less I heard of the city until it was just the quiet crunch of my steps and the wind rustling dry brush along the trail. I hiked a few miles in and found a decent flat area just off one of the smaller trail branches. I made sure it was allowed to set up camp there and pitched the tent a little back from the trail under some thin mesquite trees. It was a good spot, not too exposed, but not buried in thorns either. I set everything up, had a quick lunch of trail mix and jerky, and then decided to do a short solo hike before the sun started dipping too low. I figured I could stretch my legs for an hour or two, then be back at camp to make dinner before dark. I didn't bring much, just a small day pack with some water, my knife, and a couple of energy bars. I took a side trail that dipped down into a wash and wound around for a while through some tight canyon walls. The air cooled off in the shade, and the light got that late afternoon orange that makes everything look softer. It was the kind of walk that reminded me why I liked going out there. Everything slowed down. I wasn't thinking about anything back home. I wasn't checking my phone or listening to music. I was just there, one foot in front of the other, taking it all in. Then I saw him. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or that I was seeing things weird in the distance. But the shape didn't make sense. There was a person on the trail ahead of me, maybe a few hundred feet away, just standing still. He wasn't moving, wasn't looking around, just standing there. I stopped walking. I figured he might be looking at something, or maybe tying his shoe. But then I realized what was off. He didn't have any clothes on. Nothing. He was totally naked. His skin looked red and sun-worn, like he'd been out there for a while. His body was lean but not muscular, just thin, wiry, and sunburnt. I stood there for a few seconds, kind of frozen. It wasn't fear exactly, but more confusion. My brain was trying to slot this into a category it understood, and it just couldn't find the right one. Who the hell was walking around Sabino Canyon in the middle of the day with no clothes on? I didn't move, and neither did he. He wasn't looking at me. He was just staring off into the distance like he was waiting for something to happen, or maybe like he didn't even know I was there. Eventually, he started walking again. Not toward me, just forward on the trail, like I wasn't even there. His gait was normal, casual, like he did this every day. I stood there and watched him disappear around a bend. Still naked, still walking like none of it was strange. I waited a long minute before continuing, not really sure what to do. I thought about turning back to camp, but something in me wanted to know more. Curiosity, maybe, or that weird sense of detachment you get when something feels so out of place that it doesn't even register as dangerous right away. So I kept walking, slowly, keeping my ears sharp for any sound ahead of me. I reached the bend and looked around it, but he was gone. The trail stretched out ahead and curved down into another section of canyon, and there was no sign of him. No footprints in the dust, no broken branches, nothing. I walked a little farther, scanning the edges of the trail, looking for any sign that he'd stepped off, but it was like he'd vanished. That's when I noticed something else. The trail had a fork up ahead, and just before it, there was a small wooden sign, half rotted and faded. I walked up to it and squinted at the words. It was hard to read in the sun-bleached wood, but I could just make out something about private land and no trespassing beyond this point. The sign was tilted, maybe knocked loose by time or wind or some hiker who hadn't seen it. I looked down the side trail that veered off past the sign and saw a faint dirt road climbing up into the hills. The road wasn't on my map, but it looked traveled. There were faint tire tracks, and the scrub near it had been cleared away, almost like someone kept it maintained. I stood there for a while, weighing whether to follow it. I didn't want to trespass, especially in a place where I didn't know the rules, but I couldn't shake the image of that guy walking like it was all normal. I turned around and walked back to camp. The hike back felt longer than it should have. Every rustle in the bushes, every shift in the wind, made me glance over my shoulder. I didn't feel like I was being followed exactly, but I couldn't relax. I kept seeing that guy in my head. His red skin, the calm way he moved, like a deer that knew it belonged there. When I got back to camp, the sun was low. I made a quick dinner of canned chili, barely tasting it, and sat with my back to the trees so I could see the trail clearly. Nothing happened. No sounds, no movement. Just the slow approach of evening, the shift of air from warm to cool. That night, I barely slept. Every time a twig snapped or the wind changed direction, I jerked awake and listened hard, but nothing came. Eventually, I drifted into a shallow sleep, broken and restless. The next morning, I packed up fast. I didn't even bother making coffee. I just wanted to be moving, to be back in the car and headed back toward town. As I hiked out, I kept thinking about that guy and the road beyond the sign. Something about it felt wrong, but not in a horror movie kind of way. Just off, like I'd wandered too close to something I wasn't supposed to see. Back at the parking lot, I saw a couple of rangers near their truck and almost went over to tell them. But what was I going to say? Hey, I saw a naked guy walking on a trail yesterday. It didn't seem like a real report. And technically, he didn't do anything. He wasn't bothering anyone. Maybe he was just part of some group or had a reason to be out there. When I got home, I did some digging. Turns out, near the upper areas of Sabino Canyon, not far from where that fork was, there's a privately owned patch of land used by a local nudist colony. I found a blog post from a few years ago about someone who'd accidentally wandered too close to it and seen a few naked hikers sunbathing by a stream. They weren't dangerous, just people who wanted to live differently, out where no one would bother them. It made the whole thing make sense, but in a way, it made it stranger too. Not creepy exactly, just real. Real in a way that reminded me how little you know about a place, even when you think you've got it mapped out. I'd gone out there expecting quiet, solitude, maybe some good views and a night under the stars. What I got was a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see, something that didn't care whether I understood it or not. I still go camping, but I stay a little farther from the edges now. I look a little closer at the signs. I keep my hikes on the map trails, and when something doesn't feel right, I turn around sooner. Sometimes when I'm out there and I see the shimmer of heat in the distance or a shape that doesn't quite register right, I remember him bare, sunburnt, calm as anything, just walking, and I keep walking the other way. I've camped in all kinds of places: wooded state parks, rocky deserts, tucked away corners of national forest land. I've run into snakes, bears, wild boars, and once even a mountain lion that circled my tent at 2 a.m. None of that ever really scared me like this one time in Arizona. It wasn't anything to do with animals. I wish it had been. I was out alone that week. I'd planned a 3-night solo camping trip just outside of Prescott. I wanted the solitude. I'd had a rough couple of months, just burned out with work, tired of people, overwhelmed by noise. I'd looked up a spot deep enough into the forest that it wasn't part of the main campground, but not so far out that I couldn't get back to my car with a solid half-day hike. I wanted that middle ground, somewhere quiet, off-grid, but not survivalist level remote. The hike in wasn't bad. The trailhead was barely marked, just a small wooden post with a number that had half faded away. I parked my truck behind some brush, covered the windshield with a reflective shade, and strapped on my pack. It was about 5 miles in. I passed one couple heading out, 2 people who nodded at me as they passed. That was the last I saw of anyone. The trail wound through tall pines and junipers. In places it flattened out, quiet and golden in the sun, and in others it narrowed between boulders and brush. I took my time getting in, drank water, chewed on some jerky. I didn't bring much: tent, water filter, basic food, knife, headlamp, emergency radio. The weather was good and dry. High 70s during the day, low 40s at night. I'd done trips like this before, and I didn't expect this one to be any different. The first night was uneventful. I set up my tent near a bend in the creek where the trees opened up a little. I boiled some water for instant noodles and sat on a rock watching the sky darken. The wind died down around dusk, and everything got still in that way that only deep woods can. I turned in early and fell asleep listening to the trickle of water and the rustle of dry leaves. I woke up once to something snapping twigs in the distance, but it wasn't close and it wasn't moving fast. Probably a deer. That's what I told myself, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I went further upriver. There was a small hill about a mile north of where I camped, and I wanted to get up there and see the view. I strapped a lighter day pack with water and snacks and made the climb. Took maybe an hour. At the top, the forest spread out in every direction. Nothing but trees, rocks, and sky. I stayed up there for a bit, ate a protein bar, and then headed down again, back toward the tent. I didn't see anyone. I didn't expect to, but that afternoon something felt different. I was lying in my tent reading a paperback, the flaps tied back for airflow. I'd stripped down to a t-shirt and shorts because it was warming up, and the air inside the tent was stuffy. Around mid-afternoon, I started getting this weird feeling, like I was being watched. I brushed it off, probably my brain getting too used to the silence. It happens. You get so used to being alone that your mind starts to fill in the blanks. Still, I got out and did a slow circle of my campsite. Nothing was off. My food bag was still hung in the tree. My boots were where I left them. No tracks I hadn't made. No broken branches. I even checked the nearby trail for signs of other people. Nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid and went back to the tent. It was later, almost dusk, when I noticed the footprint. It was maybe 30 feet from the creek bed, on a patch of soft dirt near a fallen log. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't mine. I was wearing hiking boots. This was barefoot, and not small either. Bigger than my foot, wide with thick toes. Someone had been walking barefoot through my area. That by itself wouldn't have been too strange. People go barefoot in the woods sometimes. Hell, some people hike that way. But this print was fresh, edges still crisp, and the ground around it wasn't disturbed, like someone had stepped lightly and then moved on. I looked around harder after that, walked a wide loop around my site, found another print maybe 20 yards away, near a bush. Same shape, same size, same direction, coming from the woods toward my camp. I didn't like that, not one bit. I stayed up late that night. I left the fire going longer than I usually do and sat with my headlamp on, scanning the trees. Every rustle made my stomach tighten. I kept thinking, who the hell walks barefoot out here? Why not come through the trail? But the night passed. No sounds, no movement, just the wind in the trees. By midnight, I climbed into the tent, knife tucked under my sleeping pad, and finally slept. The next day, I told myself I was going to enjoy the last full day of my trip. I'd hike out the day after, but today was for relaxing. I made coffee, filtered creek water, and went for a walk downstream. I kept an eye out for more prints, but didn't see any. By mid-afternoon, I was back in camp, sitting with my back against a tree, listening to the forest. That's when I saw him. He was maybe 50 yards away. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. He wasn't wearing anything, just standing there, completely naked, half hidden behind a thick pine trunk. He wasn't doing anything, not moving, not saying a word, just watching me. My blood turned cold. I froze. I stared for a good 5 seconds, not sure if I was imagining it, but he didn't vanish. He didn't run off. He just stood there, arms slack at his sides, face expressionless, looking directly at me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into the woods. Not hurried, just slow steps, disappearing behind the trees like he'd been out for a casual stroll. I didn't move for almost a full minute. My brain was racing. I had no clue what to do. He hadn't done anything, just looked at me, just stood there. But that somehow made it worse. If he'd screamed or charged, at least it would have made sense. But this silent, slow retreat crawled under my skin. I packed up fast. I didn't even wait for evening. I stuffed my gear into my pack, didn't bother making food, didn't even check the fire pit. I just shouldered the load and hit the trail. I hiked fast. I didn't stop. The trail felt longer on the way out. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every gust of wind, every creak of a branch made my heart leap. No sign of him, nothing on the trail. I got to the truck just before sundown. The worst part? When I unlocked the door and threw my pack in the bed, I turned around once more, just scanning the edge of the trees. And I swear to God, way off in the shadows, I saw him again, standing there maybe 100 feet back, just barely visible between the trunks. Still naked, still watching. I got in, locked the doors, and drove out of there like hell was on my heels. I never went back to that area. Never even checked the maps to see if there was a cabin or property nearby. I don't want to know, because whoever that guy was, he wasn't out there by accident. And he wasn't lost. He was watching, waiting, like he knew I'd be there. And I'll take a mountain lion over that kind of stare any day. I had taken the entire week off work. It was late October, and I had been looking forward to this trip for months. Just me, my dog Tanner, and the upland birds. I'd spent the better part of September going over maps, marking possible covers where I figured there'd be pheasants and grouse. The area I chose wasn't too remote, but it wasn't exactly well-trafficked either. It was public land, a good stretch of it, about 2 hours from where I lived. I knew the spot because I'd camped there a couple of years earlier and seen birds flushing while I hiked. I drove in on a gravel access road, parked in the usual pull-off, and hiked in about 1.5 miles to a clearing I'd used before. It was a basic setup, small tent, fire ring, enough supplies for 5 or 6 days. I packed light, but I'd done this often enough to know how to stretch gear and food. I brought a small solar charger for my phone, mostly just to check weather and have in case of emergencies. But I intended to stay off it otherwise. By the 3rd day, I was in the rhythm of it. Wake up around sunrise, make coffee and a quick breakfast, then hike with Tanner through the brush and creek bottoms, looking for birds. I wasn't having the best luck, but that wasn't really the point. I was out there for the solitude and the quiet, away from people, away from noise. The only shots I'd taken had been a couple of half chances at flushing grouse that I didn't connect on, but it didn't bother me. I was alone and it felt good. The area was a mix of dense timber and open patches of tall grass, intersected by gullies and draws. Most of the terrain was gentle but uneven. That morning, I decided to head west across a small ridge, then dip down into a shallow valley that would shortcut me over to a section of land I hadn't explored yet. It was probably close to 4 miles as the crow flies, and I figured it'd take me most of the morning if I moved slow and kept my eyes peeled for movement. I had my 20-gauge over-under slung casually across my shoulder. I wore a blaze orange hat and vest, and I had my game bag and water bladder. Tanner kept a bit ahead of me, nosing through the tall grass, occasionally freezing on a scent before moving on. The trail we were on was more of a game path than anything else, but it had clearly been used before by animals, hunters, maybe hikers. It dropped into the valley smoothly, and the temperature cooled slightly as the wind died down in the shelter of the draw. We'd been moving for about 2 hours, meandering through brush and low pine groves, when I saw someone up ahead. It wasn't immediate, just the suggestion of movement at first, through a break in the trees. Then, maybe 50 yards out, I saw him fully. A man standing right in the middle of the trail, holding what looked like an AR-15 in a low ready position, pointed just down and across his body. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stood there watching. I stopped walking. Tanner, for some reason, had circled back and was now behind me. I glanced at him. He was still tail low. I've hunted with him for 4 seasons. That dog doesn't rattle easy, but he was standing rigid. The guy ahead of me looked wrong, not just because he had a semi-auto rifle in hand, but because everything about him seemed off. His clothes were filthy, dark brown Carhartts or something similar, soaked with sweat at the chest and armpits, the kind of sweat that doesn't dry. His jacket was torn at one sleeve, and his beard was thick and patchy, hanging down off a gaunt, grayish face. He looked older than me, maybe mid-50s, but worn down like he'd been living rough for months. His hair was greasy and clumped, matted against his temples. Everything in my body told me not to approach. My scalp tingled and the hairs on my neck stood up like they had a mind of their own. This was not a person I wanted to be near. The AR-15 wasn't slung. It wasn't on his back or leaning casually. He was holding it like he was expecting to use it. I didn't want to startle him. I didn't want to make it worse. I raised my free hand and kept my shotgun pointed down. I took a breath and tried to steady my voice. I managed a neutral tone, nothing aggressive, nothing challenging. But I could feel the tension in my chest, tight and cold. "Hey," I said, loud enough for him to hear without yelling. "Just bird hunting." He didn't respond immediately. Maybe 5 seconds passed, maybe longer. Then he nodded once. He said, "Fine." Another long pause. "I'm hunting deer." Except that didn't make any sense. Deer season wasn't open, not even close. Muzzleloader was still 2 weeks out. And more than that, AR-15s weren't legal for deer in this state. Not unless you had a specific platform, and even then, it was a gray area. Plus, the guy didn't look like any deer hunter I'd ever seen. No orange, no gear, no pack, no scent control, no nothing. He looked like someone who had crawled out of a junkyard and picked up a gun. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. We stood there for a few moments in silence. I felt exposed, like standing on a tightrope, waiting for the wind to blow me one way or the other. I wasn't sure if he was going to raise the rifle or just wander off. My hand itched to grip my shotgun, but I knew better than to escalate anything. If I so much as twitched wrong, I wasn't confident it'd end well. Finally, I said, "Do you know the best way for me to go to find some birds?" He looked at me, squinting like the sun was in his eyes, even though it wasn't. Then he said, "Well, I imagine you might find some back the way you came." His voice changed when he said it. Sharper, firmer, like a threat wrapped in advice. Like a warning you're only going to hear once. That was enough for me. I nodded slowly, said something like, "All right, thanks," and began backing up, eyes still on him. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there, still holding the rifle. I turned slowly, not wanting to run, not wanting to make it a chase, but needing to get away from there as calmly and as quickly as possible. Once I had enough trees between us, I picked up the pace. Tanner stayed tight to my side. I moved fast and quiet, cutting through brush and cover, not staying on the same trail. I didn't know what was down there. Maybe a meth lab, maybe something worse, but I didn't want to be anywhere near it. My gut told me the guy was dangerous, and that I was lucky to have walked away. I took a longer, looping route back to camp, checking behind me more than I usually would. I stopped twice and listened hard, crouched low, trying to hear anything out of place. Footsteps, brush moving, a safety clicking off. Nothing. Back at camp, I packed up fast. It wasn't worth the risk to stay. I didn't know if he'd follow. I didn't know if I'd accidentally wandered into someone's illegal setup. All I knew was I didn't feel safe anymore. That part of the forest felt rotten now. I didn't want to spend another night there, let alone 3 or 4. I hiked out without stopping. The adrenaline didn't really wear off until I was halfway home. The next morning, I called the sheriff's department and filed a report. I gave them a description, the general location, and everything I remembered. The dispatcher sounded calm and professional, took down my info, and told me someone might check it out. But I didn't hear anything after that. No follow-up, no confirmation. Maybe they went in and didn't find anything. Maybe they found something and decided not to share. Maybe they already knew who it was and were just trying to manage it quietly. I don't know. I didn't go back to find out. I've hunted dozens of places over the years. I've camped in spots with coyotes circling and storms rolling in. I've heard things in the woods at night that made my skin crawl, but nothing ever made me feel the way I felt that day in the valley. Standing on that trail, looking at a man who didn't belong, holding a rifle in a place he had no reason to be. Sometimes it's not the sounds or the shadows that tell you when you're in danger. Sometimes it's something else. The stillness, the way the birds stop chirping, the way your dog suddenly goes quiet, the way your body knows before your mind can explain it that you've stepped somewhere you shouldn't have. I haven't been back to that area since. I don't think I ever will. There are other forests, other trails, other birds. But whatever was down that trail, it didn't want to be found. And I wasn't about to find out what would happen if I pushed my luck. I'd been planning that camping trip for almost a month. My job had been driving me nuts lately, and between all the meetings, deadlines, and emails, I just needed to unplug and disappear for a few days. I didn't tell many people I was going, just a couple of close friends and my sister in case something happened. I wasn't going far, just a national forest a couple of hours from home, but far enough out that there wouldn't be cell service, and I liked it that way. I had everything packed the night before: tent, food, shotgun, and upland game gear, all my usual camping and bird hunting supplies. I wasn't going after anything big. Mostly grouse, maybe a few quail if I came across them. Just some quiet bushwalking, a little hunting, and time alone in the woods. I loaded the truck early that morning and hit the road before the sun came up. I got to the trailhead around 8. The lot was mostly empty, which I preferred. I knew these woods, not like the back of my hand, but enough to not feel uneasy out there. I'd camped this area a few times, hunted there more than that, and never had any real trouble. The trails weren't super maintained, but I liked it that way, felt more raw. I took my time hiking out to where I wanted to set up camp. It was a little off trail, nothing too crazy, but far enough from the main areas that I wouldn't have neighbors. The air was crisp. You could smell pine and damp leaves. Late fall had already pushed most of the tourists and casual hikers out, and it felt like I had the whole forest to myself. By lunchtime, I'd found my spot, a little clearing near a shallow creek. It was quiet, no wind, just birds, some distant rustling, and my boots crunching through leaves. I set up the tent, got everything situated, and took a short break to eat before heading out with my shotgun to do some walking. I wasn't in a hurry. I figured I'd scout the area, maybe see where the birds were moving, and circle back before sunset. I wandered a couple miles out, then cut through a low spot between two ridges, a sort of shallow valley. It wasn't a proper trail, more of a game path, but it served as a shortcut to a spot I'd had luck in the past. I'd walked through that area before, but this time felt different almost immediately. It wasn't anything specific at first, just that weird sense you get sometimes, like your body knows something before your mind does. I slowed down a bit, started looking around more carefully. The brush was thicker in the valley, quieter. It wasn't until I was about halfway through that I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the path, completely still. I spotted him maybe 30 yards ahead, just past a bend where the trees opened up a little. I don't know how long he'd been there. He had an AR-15 slung low but held tight in both hands, not dangling like someone just walking with it. No blaze orange, no camo, nothing that said hunter. In fact, nothing about him looked like he should have been out there at all. He was thin, almost gaunt, face hollowed out, dirty, long scraggly beard, and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, maybe longer. Jeans ripped at the knees, a tattered green jacket, and boots that looked like they'd been through a war. He looked somewhere around 50, but hard living can make a man look older. His eyes were sunken in, pale, and hard to make out under the brim of his hat. Something about him just hit me sideways. I stopped in my tracks, maybe 20 feet from him now. I tried to keep my breathing normal, even though my heart was beating like a drum. I had my shotgun, but it was slung on my shoulder, barrel pointed down, safety on. He had me beat if it came to anything. He didn't move, just stood there watching, not fidgeting, not shifting his weight, just perfectly still like a statue. I gave a short nod, trying to play it calm, kept my body relaxed. I knew damn well something was off, and I knew I had to get out of there without making it worse. He finally shifted a bit, just enough to show he wasn't frozen in place, and stepped slightly to one side of the trail, still holding his rifle. He didn't say anything, didn't lower the weapon, just watched. I didn't ask questions. I didn't linger. I turned, calm as I could manage, and walked back the way I came. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I didn't want to give him a reason. Every hair on my neck was standing up. My back tingled. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me or worse, gunfire. But nothing came, just the quiet of the woods and the soft sound of leaves under my boots. I walked steady until I was well out of that valley and back on more familiar ground. Once I felt like I was out of sight, I picked up the pace and got back to camp in maybe half the time it had taken me to hike out. When I got there, I didn't unpack. I didn't cook. I didn't sit. I broke camp in record time, every few seconds glancing over my shoulder. I didn't see anyone on the way out. Not on the trail. Not in the parking area. Nothing. Just me and the dirt road that led back to town. That night, I checked into a cheap motel. I hadn't planned to stay in town, but I wasn't going to sleep in the woods again after that. I called the sheriff's department in the morning, told them what happened, gave a description. They said they'd look into it, maybe send a deputy to patrol the area. But nothing ever came of it that I heard. I didn't go back to that forest for a long time after. I kept thinking about that man. How calm he was, how he didn't say a word, how he just stood there with that rifle like he belonged there. Like maybe I was the one in the wrong place. And I realized later, maybe I was. There's something that stays with you after a run-in like that. It's not just fear, it's a kind of awareness. The understanding that things can go very bad, very fast, for no reason at all. He could have killed me, easily. No one would have heard. No one would have found me for days, maybe weeks. He didn't need a reason. He had the means. And that's what gets under your skin. That it could have all been over right there on that quiet little game trail, for no reason at all. I still camp. I still hike. But I don't go out alone anymore. Not like that. And if I ever get that feeling again, that something isn't right, I trust it. Because I was lucky. That's all it was. Not smart. Not brave. Just lucky. And luck runs out.